chosen to financially support the work that we're trying to do, but that will come as well. Okay, here we go. Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your weekly update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim, and today we'll be chatting with Learning During the Pandemic, on Learning During the Pandemic with Randi Weingarten, President of the American Federation of Teachers, Kyle Zimmer, President and CEO and co-founder of First Book, and Richard Barth, CEO of the KIPP Foundation. Randi's a little bit late today, so she'll be joining us in a bit. And I'd like to thank you both for joining us. And when Randi comes on, we'll also have her join the conversation. Kylie, we've been chatting for a good number of years, and it's wonderful to see you back in DC. And Richard, we've intersected during the last years. Kylie, let's start with you. Could you talk a little bit about what you've experienced during this time and what the organization has experienced, and also your constituents, because it's been really tough on children.
It has indeed. And, you know, I want to start off, first of all, by just saying thanks for doing this, Mark. It's a wonderful service to the whole sector of the, of social entrepreneurs and others working in the nonprofit arena. So thank you for that. I also want to mention, just right out of the gate, the dedication of school teachers, school staff, and the unions. Their dedication has been on really full display during the full run of this crisis. They've been heroes during this period, and we feel really honored to serve them. First Book's role during the pandemic has really been very much part and parcel of what we do in ordinary times. We're a nonprofit, we're a social enterprise, and we support educators and practitioners serving kids in need, ages 0 to 18. We work with Randi and her team over at AFT, and we work with the NEA, and we also work with a huge range of daycares and after schools and preschools and homeless shelters, and really anywhere that's serving children in need. Right now, we've aggregated an online community of more than 500,000 of these educators in our network. And to show you a sense of the need we're seeing, that's growing by about 1,000 people a week. And our mission is to further educational equity for all kids who are living in poverty. And we do that by listening to the educators and then creating solutions to what they need. Everything from affordable, high quality, diverse books to basic needs items like hygiene kits and winter coats, to now a growing range of expert informed resources. And I'll give you just a couple of quick examples that are specific to COVID. We learned through our survey work, through our research arm called First Book Research and Insights, that 40% of the kids that our network were serving had either no devices or no connectivity. So we worked with Intel and CDW and Lego, and we got computers to about 51 school districts and connectivity grants as well. We learned that books were the #1 issue that people were coming to us with, and we really raced day and night, and the publishers stepped in like the heroes that they have been, and we got about 14 million books out during this period. And right this second, we're working with several healthcare providers to develop messaging to increase trust and decrease misinformation about the vaccine. So we really have tried to respond as nimbly as we can, but of course it's been a fire hose of issues, right?
And the really important point that you're getting across here, Kylie, is that education is about so much more than what transpires within a particular classroom. As important as that is, that's a component, right? We're talking about national strength. We're talking about national health. We're talking about positioning people to make a contribution, and also us all to be able to exploit their contribution as they grow up, right? We're talking about vaccinations. We're talking about fighting disinformation. So this is a much larger, this whole idea that teachers belong in their little bucket, right? And schools belong in their little bucket. And books are about what happens at the moment you read them. That idea needs to be combated. And it's become very clear in this pandemic that we are part of the all hands that are on deck, aren't we, Richard?
We are, and it was just a little under a year ago, and it's hard to even think in those terms, but that this thing arrived, this global pandemic arrived, and staff across the country, teachers, school leaders, health workers, had to pivot overnight into the unknown world. And so if you said, like, what's our reality been the last year, it's going to sound probably very similar to what Kyle said and what Randy will say. A little under a year ago, school as we know it came to an end. For KIPP, we have 255 schools. We're educating 113,000 children every day, and we have 32,000 alums. So we can talk about it both K-12 and higher ed. For our schools, they became food distribution centers, like schools across the country. We deliver 2 million meals because the base requirements for families had to be met first. And that goes to your issue, like it's not just what's happening in one classroom. For our kids, there are only 13 districts in the country that serve more low-income children than KIPP does. And food was the first thing we had to take care of because we knew we were delivering food to children every day. And then we had to make sure they had materials, just like Kyle said, books, materials that they could work on at home. And we discovered, I think, Mark, I'll just share quickly a few things over the following weeks and months after it hit. We discovered, one, we weren't one-to-one. We thought we were actually pretty close to one-to-one. We weren't. We thought we were. We discovered that devices that we were counting on as being able to deliver for kids weren't able to deliver remote instruction once we handed them out. We discovered, obviously, many kids, like we heard here, have devices, but not access to the Wi-Fi that they needed. And we discovered many kids had a device, but now it had to be shared among 3 or 4 people in their family. All of that we hadn't fully appreciated. And so we then discovered also that in the world we're in, procurement was going to be a massive challenge, because even if you wanted devices, there was going to be a rush to get them. So we spent $14 million in a matter of weeks to make sure we had 70,000 new devices purchased, so we could start this year one-to-one. And I can't emphasize enough, the difference between truly one-to-one and not is massive. So if you're a teacher or a leader or a family, it's like, if you're 70% one-to-one, you're like, oh, you're getting close. You're not, because now here you're starting your day, and it's like, okay, I've got 4 kids who don't have a device, and I've got 17 kids who do, and you got to be one. You have to know everyone's going to have a device. It's going to be working, and I'm not going to have to deal with that. Well, that meant not just you had to get technology. We learned we had to make sure we were able to provide tech support. We had schools. I mean, when we opened school this year, 400 customer service tickets in week 1, just in Massachusetts, and we worked through them in 2 days, where we had to go home to homes to make sure families understood how to set the computer up, how to get the technology working. We did that. So it's not just purchasing; it's actually tech support.
And if you look at Randy's membership, right? I mean, Randy, the thing that has burned me for so long is I have felt that teachers, school districts have been told for the longest time, when you talk about these issues, the equivalent of, for teachers, shut up and dribble, right? Stay in your lane. Stop talking about these things like food and nourishment and what Richard's talking about, right? And it's become clear that is just not an option. You cannot educate young people if you don't have supplies, if you don't have support, if you don't have technology, if you're not thinking about all these different aspects, right?
Exactly right. And part of this, so first off, thank you. I'm so honored to be with Richard and Kyle, and I overheard Kyle talk about, our partnerships, and as you see, books are our thing here. And I'm actually in my office today, and I'm trying to once a week, get down to Washington from New York and actually work out of my office. And I'm actually finding that very nourishing to, have some semblance of normalcy. But the point that you just made, Mark, is that we got to give up the ghost and think that we are only, about instructing on math and in English. And that is the way you create opportunity and justice. First off, science and social studies, I think that this year has proven this, are probably both as important, if not more, and and will be ways that we can actually excite and encourage our kids to be the kind of civic participants, and the ways of changing the world. And
Science, evidence, right? Social studies, civic engagement, understanding the context of what America is.
and so English and math, and thinking about it not just as this is a skill I need for a job, but thinking about it as these are skills we need for life. But then you layer on top of that the whole notion of um, who schools are, what Richard just said about schools. Kyle worked with me, and she's done such an incredible job on trying to get books to kids in homeless shelters this year to try and create some sense of normalcy in the absence of social interaction. The community schools that we had this year ended up helping families, where you couldn't stand up the food programs like KIPP was able to do or LA was able to do. So there's a whole, we have to think about as we come out of this pandemic, which I hope we will do with the vaccines and with a new administration. We have to think about schools as community foundations, and that, instead of digital remote being this is what's going to supplant, it's how do you use it to help create more security and more opportunity? How do we have wraparound services around schools? How do we have the food programs? What are we going to do this summer as like a second, I call it a second semester, not just on remediation, that and I hate the word learning loss. How do we actually help kids get their mojo back? So we have to kind of flip this around. I mean, both Kyle and Richard kind of took my words about how teachers and administrators have kind of turned themselves into a pretzel to try to deal with a pandemic with, frankly, before this new administration, no guidance, all things being downplayed, political issues, in their face, and then now trying to figure out how to have schools be safe enough to, create the safety so
Right.
that they're not going to die when they know full well that it's really important to have in school learning.
Your point about schools are essential national infrastructure.
Correct.
That's right.
It's our roads, it's our electrical grid, right? And the wonderful thing about having each of you is that you're part of that infrastructure, right? They're complementary elements, right? Randy, you're not doing what Kylie is doing. Kylie, you're not doing what KIPP is doing, what Richard's doing with his team, right? And you've got these different approaches, and there is not a one size fits all. That's not the choice. The choice is not between one size fits all and not doing it, right? The choice is, how do you create a number of different solutions for a number of different problems, thinking always of the child, right? So when you look at this going forward, because we really do have to have a conversation
But
about,
let me
yeah.
just actually say, but it's not, I mean, market-based solutions can be helpful in terms of entrepreneurial innovation, things like that. But it is like roads, like Social Security. There is a government function where government is not a bad word, but we do need government to have an infrastructure in fighting a virus. We need government to have an infrastructure in national security. We need government to have an infrastructure in helping to create opportunity for our kids. And I think both Richard and I have kind of gotten gray enough. I happen to cover my gray, but we've gotten gray enough to know that these fights about having public schools, traditional public schools, and charters compete with one another instead of figuring out what is the best opportunity for every child and how do we lift those opportunities. But it's really only, like FDR taught us, it's only government that's going to be able to create an infrastructure to solve these big problems. And I think that's part and parcel of what Biden is trying to do in these first 10 days.
I think
Can I, and I just want to build one thing just because I want to make it concrete for our listeners, because I couldn't agree more. And I'm sure Kyle, you'd agree with this too. Like, I'll just give a prime example on infrastructure and what Randy's saying. The fact that we've discovered where we are as relates to digital capabilities for all children, it's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. It's embarrassing. I was embarrassed that I did not understand where we were in my own organization. But this solution, I mean, there is an obvious answer here. There is a way to close this. There's federal legislation that's out there, and all of us could sit there and say, we can try to figure out a way to patchwork this, and it might take 50 years. While the rest of the world, other countries just say, let's be obvious about, like, we need a solution. This is where the world is today. Every family and child should have access to Wi-Fi and devices. Even when we go back, and even when we go back to brick and mortar, we shouldn't say, oh, now we don't need to worry about that. My children in my house have that. It's an assumption. And it is where we should be. So collectively, hopefully, we don't miss these opportunities, and hopefully with the new administration, they can be part of this, to say, let's close this divide now. Let's not forget what we discovered before we get back to whatever people view as normal.
It's kind of like what electricity was in rural areas 40 years ago, 50, 60 years ago. And it is an absolute essential. And I'm sure this is true for Kyle and you, Mark, and Richard, but I often use, my wife's a congregational rabbi, and we're on Zoom all the time. We pay $250 a month, probably more now, on trying to get high-speed internet.
right.
That immediately creates inequity. So it's not just the one-on-one machines that Richard was talking about. We need that E-rate program. We need that connectivity to every house. It has to be like radio waves and electricity. That's an equity issue that government has to help solve.
Well, and I think we're all in. I'll just make a quick point, Mark. I think we're all in the same pot of soup. When you start thinking about, I always worry. Let me back up and say I worry when during conversations like this, because frankly, we're not starting with a level table to begin with. We're talking about schools that have been underfunded for generations. We're talking about teachers that have been underpaid forever. And now on top of that, we're going to need an infrastructure commitment that, very much to your example, Mark, of building the US highway system, that's exactly the level of investment we're going to need. And it's not going to stop there. The schools need ongoing continuous support. Teachers cannot be the tech help desk for families that are not trained for that. And they've got their own jobs, And so when I look at it, I think we often, as a country, when there's an us and a them, whether it's race or it's economics, we tend to not be great at solving those problems when we divide ourselves like that. But the population of low-income families in public schools right now, it's more than half in US public schools. And when you look at that, this not only is an unbelievably large problem, but it is going to dictate what happens to the US economy in coming years. I mean, it's going to affect, you can't build a gated community with gates high enough that you are not going to be right there in the soup with everybody else. And so I think the us and them, we've got to get rid of that mentality that you can hear. You can pick up on it in the media, and you can pick up on it with thought leaders sometimes, that it's about helping the quote unquote poor. And we're way past that. This is all of us now.
Right. That's such an important point, right? This is not a paternalistic, right, top-down question, right? This goes to every single person, rich and poor. It goes to anybody of any race, any gender, any orientation, any passion, right? If we're going to have a strong company, look at what I'm talking about. We're going to have a strong nation. We're going to have a strong civil society. Or if we're going to have strong companies, we need people who are educated and have access. Kylie, I was just wondering, one of the things that's so interesting is this need to constantly adapt. When you started the first book, you were talking about books.
That's right.
Books are now not those physical things with paper pages that you actually turn, right? That's not really the thing. And that's been part of what we've talked about. Richard made the point about becoming tech support, right? Randy talked about having access to the internet, right? Mm-hmm. And you're also having to innovate because people need to have access to technology. They get access to texts, not through physical books. That's still very important, but also through electronic forms. How are you all adjusting to this new reality? Because very often, one of the things that just drives me nuts is when people characterize teachers and schools as being sort of conservative bastions of never change thinking, which frankly, if you talk with any teacher, that's not what you come away with.
No.
Right? How are you changing? And then Randy, let's talk about you and Richard. How are you going to, in a sustained way? Because when we did the poll, about 71% of the people felt that technology was going to result in a sustained change. So let's talk a little bit about that. How are you changing?
Well, I'll jump in quickly. They've been predicting the death of traditional books for, I don't know, decades now, and in fact, that's hasn't happened, and it will eventually. It will eventually, but there's still heart and soul of a lot of what happens in education and a lot of what's needed in homes too. But you're right, First Book has expanded our aperture dramatically, especially over the last 5 or 10 years. And so what we've done is, what we've always been focused on is barriers to equal education for kids in need. And so what we've done to make ourselves more responsive and more nimble is to build a research arm called First Book Research and Insights. Now that we have 500,000 members and they're highly engaged, we're actually in a wonderful position through Research and Insights to reach into that field and very quickly find out what the pressure points are, what their concerns are, and to respond to that programmatically. And so in very, very large part, we're driven programmatically by what our members, the educators and program people on the ground, tell us. I'll give you a very quick example, because while it all is, of course, COVID 24/7, the truth is that educators are having to deal with and want to deal with all of the issues that are confronting their kids' lives and our lives as a nation, right? And so in the category of race and culture, we ran a survey, a study before George Floyd's murder. We ran the survey and we learned that 68% of our educators said that they wanted to talk about race and inclusion. They were nervous about it. They were looking for guidance on how to do it gracefully. And that they saw and they reported to us as a barrier, given the stresses in the country, given what was going on. And so First Book really nimbly, I will say, turned and reached out and got experts from the anti-racist community, really leading thinkers, and pulled them in. We created a webcast that was like a 4-hour webcast, and 13,000 people participated, and we created a downloadable free set of strategies designed by people who are leading the field, because what we know is that it's yes, it's about technology, but yes, it's about food insecurity, and
We
yes,
have to,
it's
we
about
have to walk and chew gum at the
it's
same time, right?
That's right. That's right. And so we really, by designing that research arm, it has allowed us to have our finger on the pulse on a steady basis. And then we can, very quickly respond to what we're hearing.
Randy, in terms of your membership's priorities, if we're going to walk and chew gum at the same time, what is the educational equivalent of that right now? If you were going to take two very distinctly different issues that are at the top of your agenda in order to improve education here in the United States, what do you feel are the most important priorities that your membership has and that can be agreed across all states in this incredibly diverse country? Oh, we're having an audio issue.
I said, can you hear me now?
Now we can.
I said, it sounds like an interview for another job. Look, everything about education is very much tied into economic security, health security, how you create opportunity and justice. So it's very hard to pull the justice issues, the economic issues, the education issues, the health issues. However, having said that, I would say that they would that every single educator wants every single child, regardless of demography, regardless of geography, to thrive, and that means that we have to actually focus on kids and, frankly, educators' well-being. I think that we've learned that well-being is the entree point to powerful instruction. Second, we have to focus on powerful instruction in ways that really engage kids. And that's why I started with science and social studies as opposed to math and English. Third, we have to give teachers the tools, the time, the trust to be able to do all that is being asked of them. And fourth, we have to have the kind of community relationships and the resources, and the managerial expertise to do these things. But ultimately, if we want to get to a place where every single child can dream his or her dreams and achieve them, regardless of where they live and who they are, then we're going to really have to start with well-being, a welcoming and safe environment, and then really kind of rethink how we engage kids and what powerful instruction looks like, and how we train teachers to do this, and how we make sure that communities are part of it.
So you have well-being of all involved, right? The health, the security, the safety of all involved. You have
safe environment, right?
You have
very Maslow, very much back to Maslow.
Yeah.
And then you have instruction.
Yep.
Solid instruction.
Powerful. When I say solid and powerful instruction, I started as a social studies teacher, first as a lawyer before I was a social studies teacher. Civic engagement. If you think about the purposes of education, going back 200, 300 years, every single state constitution put public education into their constitution so that our young adults would be able to be civic participants. And so that's why when I say powerful education, we kind of went to education is about getting a job or being or getting ready for college. It actually historically in this country was about civitas. So that's why I'm just saying powerful education, engaging kids so that they want to be in school, whichever route they take. And so that's why I'm just saying not just good instruction, but powerful instruction.
And then we're talking about support for the teachers so that they are good instructors, so that they have an environment where they can actually educate, so they have the supplies and so on. And then The fourth area is sort of the whole infrastructure piece.
Right.
So support for the teachers, the human piece, and then the capital piece, the buildings and so on and so forth. Now, Richard, for programs like this, right, everybody wants to get into fights. That's what Twitter is about, so that everybody can get into fights. So you totally disagree with everything Randy said, right?
Yeah.
Because
No.
you and Randy, you're different edges of this picture, and you totally disagree. You're going to argue against everything that Randy just said, right?
I may disappoint Twitterverse today, but let me. But I would say, like, you start with the question of, like, what are we going to, on some level, what are we going to carry forward? There's always this question out there, like, is the world ever, are we going to go back to the same? And I think, I think we all are in the world where we can handle, as you said, chewing gum and walking at the same time. So let me say, I think for anyone who's listening, we can't wait to get back to school in the more traditional sense. We are dying to. I think everyone here is. We are just cannot wait for the social development of our children, not just the academic development, but for the social development, for the safety of our children, for the safety and well-being, and for the academic development. We can't wait, and teachers can't wait to get back either. I think everyone, like, they're looking at. And the question is, are we people want to know, is it just going to be going back to normal? I think we learned a bunch of this. Like, no one would ever want to have this ever happen again. And yet in life, you do have learnings from experiences. So I'm going to say a few that I think are worth sharing. One is the way we've engaged with families through this has taught us something about what families want for their children and how engaged they want to be. And I think we've learned, like, when asked, they have a huge set of insights that we've not been having. And that is, like, the number one takeaway from what I've seen over the last year. We have families now, we're engaging them on Zoom. In the old days, before COVID, even at KIPP, you might say, oh, we're innovative. Family nights were like, you have to physically get there. You want to come to the open house? You want to come to the report card night? You had to physically come to the building. Well, working families, even for me and my family, like, that's like, okay, how do I figure out my schedule? Our attendance for open house nights and report cards is through the roof because you can show up on Zoom. And when people get the technology, they're good to go. So why would we ever go back to a way of saying we're going to create barriers to entry for families to partner with us? Another example is families actually now have way more access and insight into their students' academic work. Like, I don't know that we'll ever be able to go back. They can see what their children are working on. The technology allows it. That is powerful from a partnership standpoint. And families every week now at KIPP across the country give us their feedback on how we're doing. How did this week go? What worked? What didn't? We have families who told us in a whole bunch of cities, you need to have a morning school shift and an afternoon, particularly for our younger kids. So we have morning school, we have afternoon school. We even have evening school in a lot of places now. Why? Because if you're 5 and 6 years old, we all know this, the ability to sustain your engagement really goes up when there's an adult around, just physically around to say, hey, and we did that based on family feedback. So we will never go back, I think, to the ways of partnering with families that we did before. And again, a big learning. And then I would say on technology, we can't wait to get back, but I think our teachers are telling us, wow, when properly equipped and properly trained, there are some things we're doing now that we did not even imagine we could do. So I want to avoid using names of products because I'm not an endorser, but people are doing, like, kids are doing student work in the morning that teachers have full visibility into when they start class. They know exactly what the kids have been able to do, what they understood, where were their misconceptions, and they're jumping right into that. I mean, teachers love that. Again, never want to happen this again, never want this to happen again. Can't wait to be back in person. But I think if you asked our teachers, there are a bunch of tools that have that Randy said this, powerful instruction. These tools enable teachers to be ever more powerful, which is what they want when they're equipped and when you put in the professional development. So those are just a couple things for viewers, like, we can't wait to get back, but there are things we will take forward that I think are going to be incredibly powerful for students and families.
Wonderful, wonderful points. We're coming to the end of our time. I just wanted to mention a couple of things. First of all, we took 2 additional polls, and one of the polls was when students should be allowed to return full-time to the classrooms. There were a few people who said now unconditionally. About 32%, a third, said that when teachers and school administrators agree it's okay. And 51% felt that when scientists say it's okay. It's one of those things where it looks to me as if there's a lot of divided opinion And while majority of the respondents talked about the science, there's also this human element of when people feel that they're safe. The other poll that I thought was really interesting is we were talking about, given the the impact of the pandemic on teachers and education, does that mean that more funding should be allocated to schools? 91% of people said yes, but 9% of the people said no. That's very interesting. What you've got here is a consensus forming around the importance of schools, but not a consensus necessarily locked in on how we address these problems. And so just talking about this, I'm so grateful. Randi Weingarten, president of the American Federation of Teachers, Kyle Zimmer, president, CEO, and founder of First Book, and Richard Barth, CEO of the KIPP Foundation. You all are so, and your members and your people and your staff and your communities are so important to the nation, right? We are America. So what you are doing to solve these problems in various ways is so important. Thank you so much for sharing your work with us. We're so very grateful. Randi, I'm going to give you the last word. You represent 1.7 million members. They are frontline workers and recognized in that way like never before. Could you see us out for this discussion?
Just let's say, I have a lot of gratitude to all of them. I have a lot of gratitude to the healthcare workers, to the EMS workers, the firefighters, the grocery store workers, the educators, the food service workers. Because in this pandemic, they have been the front line that has kept people safe, protected, engaged, trying to help parents, who have now become homeschooling their kids. And so I think that in a world where we have a lot of polarization and where people are very, very, very tense because this has not yet magically gone away, like people believe American exceptionalism should have created, that we have a lot of people, ordinary people, have done exceptional work in America right now. And I just want to say thank you to them, as well as thank you to all of you in terms of listening to us and have us. Let's find a way to chart a course where America can be more economically just, focus on opportunity, and focus on our better days ahead in a way that I hope is less polarizing. Education is really, really important as part of that. And I count on our folks to actually do their part, as they always have, to create a better America.
We earn our way toward being exceptional. May we be exceptional in our conduct and in how we work together. Thank you all so much. Attendees, thank you so much for being part of the show. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your answers to the Q&A. And thank you, guests, for sharing your wisdom with us. Have a great day. That's the Nonprofit Report.